All right. How is everybody doing? Yay! I missed the keynote. Was it good? Yay! I'm gonna watch it. Every year I tell myself I'm gonna watch all the sessions because they go online. And I think I have a backlog from maybe from 2013 with videos and sessions I'm supposed to watch. I don't know if everybody does the same, but I really try to attend sessions instead of telling myself I'm going to watch them later, because it's not going to happen. So I have all the sessions from Build, I have all the sessions from the NDC conference, and I have a bunch of sessions I'm going to watch, and I never end up doing it. So if you want to see a session, go see it. Now this session is going to be interesting, I hope. I'm going to talk about ASP.NET Core in production. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm pregnant. Yeah, I thought that this was a good illusion with the stripes. But from the side, you kind of can tell. So yeah, I'm due any time actually. They thought I was going to go into labor 2 days ago. So, but I was like, no, because I'm going to a conference. So we're doing that afterwards, put him back in. So you can see if you can spot the nervous father in this room somewhere, ready with the bag, ready to run out the door in case something happens. But this is not what we will be talking about today. I'm going to talk about ASP.NET Core, which I find a very fascinating topic. Actually, just .NET Core itself is very fascinating and something I'm very, very, very excited about. And also .NET Standard. I don't know how many people here ever had the pleasure of playing with the portable class libraries. Anybody? I was really optimistic about that. So optimistic, I did a course on it, on portable class libraries. I don't know how many views, but my royalties are kind of low, so yeah. So I'm very excited about .NET Standard, because I think that's going to be that it is already a game changer in terms of cross-platform and portability and so much more, actually. When it comes to ASP.NET Core and running it in production, it's something we're doing at my workplace. I'm a back-end developer at a company called Construct, and what we do is best demonstrated by toilet paper. I had to bring it just in case my water breaks. No. This is why I'm wearing a long dress. I'll just let it slide down the leg. Okay, they might have to edit this video. You lose all privacy when you get pregnant, really. You just overshare everything with everybody. I'm sure a lot of you guys and girls know this. Okay, so it's a toilet paper roll because I didn't have any other roll with paper. But what we do is we do company planning, any type of large enterprise planning that is numeric. We support other data types, but mostly it's numeric, such as data-driven budgeting, prognosis, and so on. Basically, when companies have this one massive Excel file that they pass around to all their departments, and they give each person a sheet, here, one there. I would run out and hand out paper, but I can't do any running. So you have all this, and then you have to sort of consolidate all of them at the end, and it gets really, really, really messy. So Excel isn't really made for that, because they end up very long and very complicated. So that's what we do online in the cloud. And we have very large companies, and we have quite a few services. Now, a few years ago, when .NET Core first came out, and also ASP.NET Core, we were very excited about this, and mostly because for us, what we wanted and what we needed was performance, and also because, ooh, shiny. Everybody loves the shiny stuff. So when it came out, we thought, well, let's give it a shot. But we wanted to, before we did it, we wanted to find out a little bit more about it. So I'm just going to do a very small prep, although I'm sure a lot of the things I'm going to say now are things you already know. But just to be on the safe side, I'm just going to cover some of the questions that some people have, hopefully in an understandable way. I'm so out of breath. All right, so you have the .NET Standard. .NET Standard is basically a blueprint or an interface. You can think of it sort of as an interface. It promises a set of APIs. It's not a platform, it's just a promise of what you're going to get. And what happens is you have the different platforms, and if they support .NET Standard, that means that they implement those set of APIs. But they do have additional other stuff, but you're guaranteed to have the set of APIs that are defined in the blueprint. So for example, you have .NET, and then you have .NET Core. You'll find some things in the .NET framework that you're not going to find in .NET, and then you have some things in .NET Core that you're not going to find in .NET. But if you want to compile for both the platforms, you want to have a library that you can run on both the platforms, what you do is you create a .NET Standard library, then you promise that these things will be available. Now, if the case is that you actually want to support some of the things that are not in the .NET Standard, you can do that, and there are a few ways that you can do that with conditional compilation, and, well, I guess you could use dependency injection and adapter pattern and a few other things. But generally, this is what .NET Standard is. It's a promise. It's not an empty promise because there are holes. It does deliver. And it's come a far way. In the beginning, it was so and so, but it's come a far way. So that was the first question we had. What the hell is this? Now we know. So figuring out the confusion between .NET Standard and supporting several platforms is just the beginning. Because when you start supporting several platforms, you also get into the challenge of testing for different platforms. Obviously, you can't have a .NET Standard unit test library, because you can't have your unit tests test against a non-existing platform. So you have to specify the platforms you want to test against. But I'll get back to this later. First of all, I want to show you how our system looks like. So I've tried to get most of the services in. I forgot to draw in the toolings. But basically, we have one client that's quite heavy and complicated. And the client has its own front end and back end and so on, because clients today aren't so lightweight anymore. They do a lot of logic because the browser can manage that. Then we have a proxy. And through this proxy, it communicates with our authentication service, and we support different types of authentication. We have separate services for the different third-party authentication services that we have. And then we have a bunch of different services. I'm going to get back to this drawing later on. Now, this might look like microservice architecture. We like to call it microservice architecture because, one, it's cool, and two, if you squint your eyes and zoom out, they look very micro, very small. But the truth is, they all talk to the same SQL Server cluster. So they all go to the same databases, which basically makes this a distributed monolith. That's what it is. We're slowly moving towards a microservice architecture, but I'm sure, as a lot of you know, that's hard. And then all our logging is done in Azure. We're using Application Insights. All the logging, events, errors, warnings, all information checked into the same place. And then we have services that pull out the information from this unified log and make sense of all the data. And that's where you see the... Did I draw them there? Yes, the consultant portal and the telemetry portal. So this is our system. Now, the yellow clouds that you see, those are actually ASP.NET Core services, and the blue ones are ASP.NET, the classic ASP.NET. All right, confusion number 2. So, so you got ASP.NET, then you have ASP.NET Core.NET, and then you have ASP.NET Core Core. I just love it when you open a new project in Visual Studio and you get so many options. And sometimes they try to be really clever about it and then make you click to the next window before you make another selection, just to sort of let you breathe before you see a long list of other selections that you get. So here's the deal. You have good old ASP.NET. I'm not talking about ASP classic, you know, back in the days. Still out there, but back in the days. You need to enable the feature if you're going to use it, because it's that old. Then you have ASP.NET Core targeting the full .NET framework. So you get a lot of the juicy stuff from ASP.NET Core, the framework itself, but you're targeting the full .NET framework, so you have the limitations that come with that. So it's not cross-platform. Then you have ASP.NET Core, which means that you are using the ASP.NET Core framework, but you're targeting .NET Core, which means you get all the juicy stuff, everything. Now, if you read the documentation and you take a look at how you do a migration, for example, sometimes they recommend that you could always just migrate to ASP.NET Core and then target the full .NET framework. But you should be aware, because here comes another confusion. Ta-da! Version 3. Yes, there have been a few breaking changes. Anybody here heard about Project Jason? Yeah, that was interesting. So there are breaking changes, and in version 3 there are a few breaking changes. One of them is that they have announced, and you can see this on GitHub under announcements on the ASP.NET repository, and I really recommend that you go take a look. And it says there that from version 3 they're not going to support targeting the full .NET framework. But 2.2 and previous versions, they will still be supported until like 2021 or 22. But it's Microsoft, they'll probably support it until like 2050. But officially, right? Because everybody has some terminal servers somewhere still running XP, which by the way was pretty good, except from the security issues, but XP was pretty nice, better than Vista. So I've been talking about confusion, and that brings me to the next point. I'm going to talk about the lessons we have learned running ASP.NET Core in production. And the first thing we have learned is, I think this is very Swedish. You give this to babies so they can like chew and drool on it, and they keep it for many years, and it gets really dirty. There's lack of maturity whenever you have something new. That's quite obvious. And even though the adoption rate has been really good with both .NET Core and ASP.NET Core, there is still lack of maturity, which I hope was evident with I think the confusion with .NET Standard and .NET Core is just natural confusion when you try to have something cross-platform. But that's how you end up with the confusion with what am I supposed to create and target? And also with breaking changes. So what has happened is the adoption rate has been really good. ASP.NET Core is open source. Sure, most of you know that. There are a lot of benefits with that. The transparency is really nice. You can actually see what's going on. You can follow the issues. There is a tag you should follow, breaking changes. Make sure you keep an eye on that. And bugs. But downside is also that people have opinions, you know? Somebody said, people are like assholes, everybody has one. No, sorry, that was the wrong one. Opinions are like assholes, everybody has one. I think both of them is a good saying, but the last one was the correct one. Baby brain. I'm gonna use this as an excuse for as long as I can. A couple of more days. So you have the maturity issue. So when you have something that's been around forever, you have reliable documentation, you go on Stack Overflow, you find an answer that was answered 2 years ago or something, copy-paste, yeah, we're good at that, and it works. Not anymore. Because now, you go to the documentation, and it asks you, is it version 1? No. Is it version 1.2? No. Is it 2.0? And by the way, the difference between version 1 and 1.2 was like the minor update between Windows 8 and 8.1. I was writing a book on Windows Store apps, and I was almost done with the book when 8.1 came out. And we have to rewrite half the book. though, is it number 2 or is it, I have a few more versions. They're sticking together 2.1 and then 2.2, and you have to make sure you select the right one. So whenever you're looking for information, the documentation is going to be the best place to go. Stack Overflow is going to be confusing because it really depends on the version. And there are a lot of versions. So lack of maturity is obviously the first lesson that we learned, because we adopted early and then we had to migrate between the versions. Now, at least last few versions, I think it was from 1.2 to 2 it was, where they at least had a tool helping you migrating, and they've gotten better at documenting this. So what you should be aware of with the lack of maturity is that you have to stay up to date. You can't be lazy. You can't go like, this is never going to change. And they're going to make sure. Of course, they're not going to let things break. Things are going to break now because we want to have the best practices, and people are going to have opinions. And the community is pushing really hard, and the team is pushing also really hard, that not to just let shit glide, you know? So if something isn't considered a good practice, they're going to make a change. And actually, under the issues on the repository, you'll find some very interesting discussions. One of them was with the implementation of the memory cache. Because the new implementation of the memory cache, you actually can't iterate the objects in the cache, which we used to do because for debugging reasons, because we implemented our own non-distributed cache that sort of has to consolidate across 14 services. So we had to always look in the cache and see that everything was correct. But I can totally understand when they say that it's not considered good practice because it might have changed, blah, blah, blah. But there are a lot of good discussions and there is transparency. But if you're gonna use ASP.NET Core and you wanna use it soon in production, keep an eye on the repository, because there are still changes going on. Lesson 2, time to get a little bit more positive, and that is there are some unexpected benefits. And I'll try to symbolize this with a little present. I was hoping I had cookies in here. No cookies for you. Well, go to a browser, there'll be cookies there. There are a lot of unexpected benefits. So when people look at the pros and cons of running ASP.NET Core, they usually go to the usual ones like, oh yeah, this is like totally made for containers. By the way, anything can run in a container. You don't need ASP.NET Core to run a web service in a container. You can lift and shift a whole virtual machine into a container if you want to. I'm not sure if I would do that, but anyways, people think of the standard benefits such as, oh, the request rate is really good, and it's modular, and everything is a NuGet package, and there's good architecture, and so on. But we had some unexpected benefits that we didn't think about, which was a very nice surprise. And the biggest one was the last one I mentioned. ASP.NET Core is quite opinionated in its architecture. Not to the point where you can't do however you'd like to do, but it does enforce or at least encourage good practice, such as dependency injection. Don't get started on a discussion if you don't like dependency injection and you want to start having a discussion about that, the service location and so on. We'll have that afterwards. But a lot of people consider dependency injection a good practice. And they also have their policy pattern, which they use when you define course policies, authorization requirements or policies, and so on. So they have a lot of good patterns going on, and they spent more time thinking about how they want it to work. At least when you compare it to just the plain old ASP.NET, that sort of just grew over time. And there are a few patterns there, but they're all mixed, mashed together, and so on. Now, we already have a lot of good patterns and somewhat good architecture in our system. But when you go over to something completely new that is opinionated, it forces you to think and it forces you to make some decisions. And that was a very strong benefit. And some people may say you get that with most new things, but not all frameworks are opinionated and not all frameworks have put as much thought into how the architecture should be. And the reason you see this in ASP.NET Core is because ASP.NET is used everywhere. it's a very, very popular framework. So there are a lot of people very interested in the code behind it, and you get a lot of great discussions with very good outcome, is my opinion, or our opinion. So unexpected benefits. But don't overestimate don't overestimate the benefits, because some things are, so we had this, oh man, I spoke at DockerCon 2 years ago, and I came back to my team and I was like, containers, we're gonna have containers, everything's gonna be a container, containers are amazing, the best thing in the world. It's called conference-driven development. It's a real thing. You go to a conference, you get an idea, and you go like, holy shit, this is so cool. I'm going to drop everything. We're going to rewrite everything. And yeah. So, I mean, we were thinking we were going to have containers, we're going to have containers in containers in containers, sort of like a Russian doll. And we had all these grand plans. But then turns out we're a startup, we're on limited resources, and we have features to implement, and our backlog of bugs it's good enough to call anti-CMEX, We we need a proper cleanup. So it's not going to happen. It's going to happen somewhere in the future, but it definitely shouldn't be the main reason that we start migrating things to ASP.NET Core, because we're thinking that at some point we want to do containers, unless it's in the very, 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 very near future. So don't overestimate the benefits. For us, the request rate, we don't have a lot of users. We have big users. Our tenants are quite big. One of our tenants is Espresso House. They have like 300-400 coffee shops. I don't know. It's like they're quite big. So we have very big users. But since we're dealing with mostly the finance part of a company, there's a limited amount of people actually logging in and doing things. So our performance problem and challenges are not in the request rate, unless we get attacked. Then we have no plan for that, so don't try. We need performance in terms of working with numbers. That's our biggest challenge. And thankfully, .NET Core is actually really, really efficient, and that's been a massive benefit for us. But the request rate doesn't really matter for us. So don't overestimate the benefits. You gotta think through it. Lesson 4. I get a pair of shoes. They're so cute. They're super cute. So how do they even keep their balance on something like this? Like, why don't they? Oh, well, actually, they do fall over all the time. There's a Reddit thread called Children Falling Over. I don't know, somebody's got a weird fetish if they're following that thread. I mean, I follow cats, not kids falling over. So, yeah. Baby steps are allowed. So this is a lesson we learned. First, we wanted to migrate everything. So it's okay, if you're starting now, you might as well pick ASP.NET Core, honestly. You'll find most of the libraries are supported, and I'll talk about how you can find out what's supported and what isn't, and tools and resources available. But if you're doing a migration, you don't have to migrate all of it at the same time. You can start off with just migrating a few services, break out a piece of logic and migrate that, or you can also use it for tooling. So in that beautiful drawing, complimenting myself here, on that drawing, I didn't draw all the tools that we have. We have a bunch of tools, and they're all written in .NET Core. And we also have some tools that are ASP.NET Core, that are web services that we're talking to. And it's actually quite beneficial to create tools, because ASP.NET Core is really made for small services and getting something up and running fast. You can create big services, but it does encourage more of a micro-architecture, whatever we agree on that meaning, because that seems to change all the time. Back in the days, SUA was cool, but now it's called microservices, mini services of some sort. But anyways, you can do baby steps and just migrate some of them. You don't have to do it all at once. However, I'll say there are some challenges with doing that. I'm gonna I'm going to talk about it soon. This is just an example to demonstrate what I mean. So if you have a system and you want to migrate the whole thing, I'm going to talk about migration because that's a bit more challenging than just creating a new system from scratch. I think most people here already have stuff they're working on. You already work for some sort of product as a consultant or a part of the team. So if you're migrating an ASP.NET service, you migrate it to an ASP.NET Core service, for example. Now, I said you might be better off targeting .NET Core instead of the full .NET framework, considering that the next version is not going to support that. But depending on the library that service uses, if that service uses libraries that are not used anywhere else, those libraries can be a specific platform, and you don't have to worry about .NET Standard, and maybe you can benefit from some of the things that are not supported in the .NET Standard quite yet, but on the other platform. However, if you have a mixed system like we do, where we have shitloads of services, and a lot of them use the same libraries, and you have a mixture of .NET and .NET Core, then you usually want to have a lot of libraries that are .NET Standard, and your tests will be a multi-target test library, or you'll have to double up, which is basically the same thing. But it gets a little bit messy. Unfortunately, it does get a little bit messy. So although I'm saying that the lesson 5, that a painless migration is possible, symbolized by painkillers, which this is the parent box. It's a big size. If you have a headache at a conference, find somebody who's a parent. I bet you they got painkillers in their bag. So migration doesn't have to be a pain, because you don't have to do it all at once, and you can have a mixed system. But if you want to have it like a bit less pain, then here's a suggestion that I have. Oh, my phone just started doing stuff. If you're going to do a migration and you want it to be sort of painless, or at least less pain, which is possible, in our experience, it hasn't been that painful, honestly. This was a good lesson to learn. This was a nice surprise, because we expected it to be a lot of work. Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to do a proper analysis of your whole solution. And the first thing you do there is you go ahead and you clean up all your unused references, and you take a good look at all the dependencies you have and see if you can remove some of the dependencies. You don't want to pad left. Do you guys know the pad left story? The node package pad left? So there's this package, pad left. There's like 11 lines of code, short lines, JavaScript lines. Not Visual Studio resharp or refactored lines, which are this long, like a link expression. So this guy who wrote this package, he got into an argument with some company or something like that, and he was like, screw this, and he removed all of his packages, including pad left. Pad left was like the smallest, tiniest little package. But everybody was using it, although anybody could write it themselves. But it's so convenient just to pull in a dependency, and it's there. And then you tell yourself, well, he's written tests, la la la, and it's open source, so what can possibly go wrong? Well, the internet broke. Like all the big companies were using this package somewhere. And you know how the dependency tree is with node modules. It's nice and modular, but holy shit, you get quite a tree. And if you unravel that dependency diagram somewhere or graph, somewhere you'll have a pad left, and then it stops working. So you don't want to have dependencies on stuff that aren't really necessary, because things can change and things can break. So before you do your analysis, clean up your project. And you can do that pretty fast, actually. I'll show at least one tool. And you look for your resources and so on. Then you can run something called a Portability Analyzer tool. Tool that's also found in the .NET Core repository there somewhere. A lot of repositories there. And you can go ahead and do an analysis, and you can see what dependencies are not supported. And there are other tools that you can use as well. And you can get a percentage of that. Then you just do a little bit of planning. You decide on if you want to migrate whole services or just chunks of them, and you do some preparation. You set up your environment, maybe create a couple of templates. If you're gonna, create a lot of projects, you can set up a template, makes it a little bit easier. You set up your scripts, because I'm gonna talk about the deployment pipeline and lessons learned there, so I'll get back to that. And then you go ahead, you retarget all your projects to a framework version that's at least beyond 4.61, I believe it has to be. Then you start porting your libraries and your tests, configuration, authentication, and so on. And then you modify the pipeline, prepare your machines, and test that everything works. So it is work, I'm not gonna lie, there is some work involved, but it's not that painful, honestly, and you get a lot of cleaning done on the way. It's like spring cleaning. But yes, do expect pipeline changes. This is a pipeline, a very short pipeline. Yeah, I had to force my significant other to eat all the chips so I could bring it on stage. Because considering I'm like constantly hungry, I'm probably standing here eating chips if there was something left in it. So it's empty now. Woohoo! Yes, there will be pipeline changes. We didn't expect that. We thought everything would just work. No, it doesn't. So we use TeamCity. I guess it depends on how your pipeline is set up. So we use Git, we use GitHub, we use TeamCity and Octopus Deploy. That's our pipeline, basically. I think I have a photo. Yes, I do. Here's the photo. Where do I start? It's very pretty, but it's also very confusing. I'm not a UXer. All right, I'm a developer. I'm writing code. I'm pushing the code to the repository. TeamCity is, listening. Oh, change. Oh my God, I must compile. TeamCity runs the build steps. It builds, it runs the tests and linting and checks conventions. We disable that. Yeah, sometimes we even disable tests. But then we create the packages. The packages, beautiful packages, are pushed out to Octopus Deploy. Octopus Deploy has these little tentacles installed on all the different environments and machines that we have. And we deploy first to Edge, make sure everything runs. Then we deploy to QA, we do some testing. Then we deploy to AT, we let a couple of clients do some testing that likes to be early testers. And then to production. And it goes out. And a few lucky ones are allowed to even run our system on premise. But we're going to stop doing that. So that's our pipeline. So the majority of the changes that we've had has absolutely been in the part of our build server, not so much the deployment aspect. There are a few things you need to think about when you deploy ASP.NET Core services. For example, what operating system you're deploying to. You can actually deploy a package, framework dependent or self-contained. So you can actually deploy it with everything it needs, and it will just run. So you don't need to pre-install assemblies and manually update your machines. However, you'll still need to have some configuration and modules installed on your IaaS if you're using IaaS to host your services. But regardless, there are a few decisions that you need to make in terms of deployment, but it's not too icky a setup. It's very similar. They're just a few tweaks, really, for us at least. The biggest change was in everything from building to creating packages and so on. So we've been doing it very clicky and used a lot of the plugins in TeamCity, but the support for .NET has been so-and-so. So we've ended up having to just write scripts that use the .NET tools, the .NET CLI tools instead. So we have the same steps, but separate. So it's like we have two pipelines now. One for our core services, ASP.NET Core services, and one for our .NET services. And we'd love to unify them. But the best way to do that is basically to just script everything. And then we don't really need TeamCity anymore, because we can do pretty graphs ourselves. So you should know that there is some work with the deployment pipeline, and it's very, very easy to forget. But back to a more positive note, on the last lesson learned, we had way more lessons, but I only have 40 minutes. There are a lot of tools and resources available, And for every bruise and cut and pain, there's a Band-Aid. That's very poetic. I like that. There are a lot of tools available. And I have to say, I'm amazed by the community and the stuff people have come up with. And the adoption rate is, it's really good. It's like Angular React good and even better. So there are a lot of tools and resources. I mentioned the portability tool, so I'll just pick just a couple. The portability tool gives you, back to the toilet paper. I'm not saying Excel is shit, by the way. That's not what I'm saying. Excel is pretty awesome. I love this stuff. You can run the portability tool, and then you get this amazing analysis, a couple of sheets. And you can also run it in Visual Studio, or that's where you should run it, because I think they have a bug if you run it from the command line, or maybe they fixed it. But in Visual Studio, you'll get a lot of information on your error list, and you can click on them, and it'll take you to the problematic method or type that's not supported, for example. But anyways, you get this Excel analysis, and then you can see the percentage is supported, what is supported, why it's not supported, and you get a lot of details. For example, it says here the configuration manager, which this is an old screenshot. The configuration manager is now supported. It does now support the .NET standard. However, I'm not going to get into details, but in ASP.NET Core, there are other ways to read configuration files than using the configuration manager. But if you just want to port and migrate things over, you could use the NuGet package. So the portability tool is really nice. There's also this website, which is, I think, is done by Octopus Deploy. Kenai has .NET Core. It's a bit more colorful. I like that. It's more cheery. So besides this graph, you also get a list and also a suggestion with libraries that you can use instead, which is really neat. However, last time I checked, it's not updated very frequent, so I would give it a go, but I probably stick to the portability tool as the #1, even though it doesn't have the same pretty graphs. There is also more. There are so many Visual Studio extensions that you can use. There's a very tiny Visual Studio extension that the only thing it does is retarget the framework version of your projects. But if you have like 50 of them like we do, unless you want to modify all the proj files, and I'm terrified of doing that manually or even with a script. You can run this extension and it'll go ahead and retarget all of them, because you need to at least be running 4.61, I believe, to be able to do a migration later on. And also, if you're going to run the analysis tool, it's good to run a later framework version. Then you have ReSharper, which I've been using a lot. ReSharper is actually really great for refactoring. It slows down Visual Studio, super duper slow, but it's still pretty awesome. So you can do things such as you can look up code issues and you can sort by issue type, and you can go to type or member is never used, and you can go ahead and remove all the types and members that you're not using, and then afterwards you can analyze all the references in your solution and your projects, and you can find out references that you have that you're not using, and then you can remove them, because then the analysis tool is not going to bring up a lot of unsupported blah blah blah, but you're not actually using them. And you can get very nice like dependency graphs as well. This is very neat to have when you're doing a migration, so you know where you want to start migrating and how the dependency tree looks like. There are so many tools and resources. I'm not going to go through them. I don't know if somebody wants to like take a photo of them. Other things I want to mention is there are blogs. Make sure you follow the Microsoft Web Dev blog. You'll see a lot of the announcements there. You have the article of the day. There are videos. And here's the link to the portability tool. And there's a repository, which is a collection of really nice .NET Core tools that you can use. So definitely take a look at it there. And the final advice that I want to give with all the lessons learned, and I try to keep this very concise, is one, as I said many times, do an analysis. Totally worth it. Do an analysis. Don't forget the pipeline. Even if you're starting from zero, always start by creating the pipeline. because everybody today should have a continuous integration and deployment pipeline in place, even for like the smallest of solutions. Stay up to date and stay engaged. Follow the repository on GitHub. Yes, you can do that. You can add webhooks to issues and also issues with certain tags. If you're using Slack, you can pipe it into your Slack channel or something like that. But make sure that you stay up to date and engaged. Issues tagged with breaking changes. They also have announcements, and they also have roadmap. Keep an eye on the roadmap so you know what's happening. Start small, so you get a good feeling for it and get the team excited and engaged. But most important, you have to stay flexible, because things are going to keep changing and we are going to keep learning lessons. But we have to be flexible, otherwise it's just going to be a pain in the buttocks. And that, my dear friends, that was like an exercise for me. I burned so many calories and I'm so out of breath. But thank you so much for attending this session. I don't have time for questions now because I only had 40 minutes and I wanted to talk for them. But you'll find me here. You can ask me questions. I'm more than happy to share more about, in particular, migrating. I'm actually writing a book on that, migrating to ASP.NET Core. So I should know the insights out of that. Enjoy the rest of the conference and thank you for attending.